Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today, Appliance Standards Update. I'm Joe Wachunas with Electrify Now and New Buildings Institute, here as always with Brian Stewart, and really excited about our panelists today, and welcome. So this webinar is being brought to you by two organizations. The Advanced Water Heating Initiative is a market transformation initiative that seeks to decarbonize water heating in both the residential and commercial sectors through heat pump water heaters. I'll put a link in the chat to the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, and we hope you check it out and join our working groups.
Yes, and many of you may be familiar with Electrify Now. We're another organization hosting this event today. And if you aren't familiar with us, we are basically a volunteer organization that's devoted to helping people to take advantage of the benefits of electrification in their homes and their lives. And we try to keep it as simple as possible for people to actually take action to do these things through these 4 steps. And, most of it's about what we can do ourselves in our own homes in terms of getting clean electricity and electrifying our houses and our transportation. But we also like to remind people that we need to bring everyone along with this journey. So if you want more information, of course, you can check out our website. We want to thank you, all of you who may have made a donation. You may have seen that on the registration page to Seeds for the Soul. It's an amazing organization we work with here in Oregon that uses donations from people like us and some state funding to help low-income households put rooftop solar on their homes and then repay the loans that they get from Seeds for the Soul through their energy savings. Also now installing heat pumps and heat pump water heaters as well. We love what they're doing and love anything you can do to help support. Thank you.
Great, yeah, and I'll put a link in the chat to an upcoming webinar that we that went live today. We're going to be talking about solar net metering and how it's under threat. Many of you may have seen the situation in California. Other states, including Oregon, are considering whether to get rid of solar net metering. So we're going to explore that in our next webinar on February 22nd. And as usual, please check out all of our webinars are recorded and on our YouTube page. I'll put a link in the chat. Anything on electrification is there on our YouTube page, so check that out. Brian, so why are we talking about appliance standards, efficiency, and natural gas prices today?
Great. Well, yes. I mean, I think a lot of times energy efficiency doesn't get as much, recognition for the amazing changes in our lives that are partly the result of the devices we use getting more and more energy efficient all the time. And I love this slide from ACEEE, one of the organizations who's going to be on our panel here in a minute. We'll be introducing Stephen Nadell, who was the author of this report where this slide comes from. But the cool thing about this slide is you can see that all these things that we're familiar with, like, for example, homes use 40% less energy now than they did in 1980. Clothes washers, 70% less. Even the losses from electricity transmission have gone down by 25%. And the amount of energy that's used to create the products that we use all the time have gone down roughly 40% on a unit per unit basis. And so basically almost everything that we use in our lives use less energy now than it did 20, 30, 40 years ago. Often these things happen slowly, so you might not notice it, but it has this incredible compounding effect as all these devices scale and become the new normal. So for example, if you look at electricity consumption here in the United States over the last 20 years, it's been remarkably flat. Even though we've added 30 million people to our population, we have larger homes. There's 15 million heat pumps that are heating those homes now that didn't exist 20 years ago. We have 2.5 million EVs that also didn't exist, 5,000 data centers, and millions of products that use electricity that weren't even a glimmer in someone's eye in 2000, like consider smartphones. So despite all this electricity usage with these new devices and more people, because energy efficiency is demanding less of the grid all the time because of the efficiency of the devices, we get this view of a roughly flat electricity use over the last 20 years. So that's why, and part of the reason that this is happening is because we have good appliance standards in some cases, and in some cases not so good, which is one of the things that we've been talking about. And one of the reasons why we're excited today is because there's some really important changes that are coming up around 2 devices in particular. furnaces and water heaters of all types that are really exciting in terms of the potential they have to reduce our energy use even further. And then, you know, it may at first blush sound like, why are we talking about gas prices and also appliance standards? There is a relationship between these things. Partly, you know, as electric devices get more and more efficient, you know, we're huge advocates of heat pumps, for example, and heat pump water heaters. As these things get more efficient and more attractive, more and more people embrace them. One of the reasons that gas prices are related to appliance standards is because as more people embrace electricity for heating their homes and flee the gas system, that has an effect on gas prices. But there are other things that are going on with electrification mandates around the country, and also just the cost of keeping up our gas system that we'll be talking about. So I think it's important to really see how these things are related, and we'll have a really good glimpse of what to expect with gas prices in the future. And we've got two fantastic panelists to help us with this conversation. I really couldn't be more ideal. We'll first be talking with Joanna Maurer. She's the Deputy Director of Appliance Standards Awareness Project. And if you're not familiar with ASAP, they were founded, it's kind of a joint project between the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, that's ACEEE, and we'll be talking more about that organization in a minute. The Alliance to Save Energy, the Energy Foundation, and the Natural Resources Defense Council. They realized that combining forces on this would be advantageous, and so they created ASAP to advocate for appliance, equipment, and lighting standards to reduce carbon emissions and air pollution, save water, and reduce energy burdens for all of us, including low and moderate income households. So Joanna, as the Deputy Director there, leads the technical advocacy work in the U.S. Department of Energy rulemakings for efficiency standards for residential appliances and commercial and industrial equipment. She has a lot of experience before joining ASAP, including working for the Environmental Protection Agency and the Center for Integrative Environmental Research. So thank you, Joanna, for joining us today. We'll also be joined by Stephen Nadell. He's the Executive Director of American Council for Energy Efficiency, Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE. We like to call it because that's a mouthful. And again, if you're not familiar with ACEEE, they're another amazing organization it's a nonprofit research organization that develops policies to help reduce energy waste and combat climate change. He has over 30 years of experience in the energy efficiency field and has produced hundreds of publications, including that one that I just referenced earlier in the introduction. And his current research includes utility sector energy efficiency programs and policies, state, federal, and local energy and climate change policy, and appliance and equipment efficiency standards. So really excited to have both Joanna and Stephen here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna.
Great, thanks for the introduction. Oh.
I'd just like to remind people, sorry, Joanna, that, you know, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And if we don't answer them live, we'll surface your questions at the end to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Brian. So I'll be talking a little bit today about new efficiency standards for furnaces and water heaters. Brian already gave a little bit of an introduction to ASAP. We advocate for efficiency standards at both the federal and state levels. And we have a steering committee that includes representatives from environmental and efficiency nonprofits, consumer groups, the utility sector, and state government. So just a little bit of background on appliance standards. So appliance and equipment standards specify minimum efficiency levels for specific products, and federal appliance standards apply to products that are manufactured or imported for sale into the US. The first federal efficiency standards were established in 1987, and there are currently roughly 60 products that are covered by existing standards, including residential products, commercial and industrial equipment, lighting products, and plumbing products. And because appliance standards affect everything that's sold in the US for those products that are covered by standards, appliance standards are a powerful tool for moving the market to more efficient products. And standards have saved more energy in buildings than any other national policy. Efficiency standards have helped drive really big reductions in energy use for many products. So for example, compared to refrigerators that were sold in the early 1990s when the first federal standards took effect, new refrigerators sold today use less than half as much energy on average, even as refrigerators have gotten bigger over time. New clothes washers use about 75% less energy, even as tub volumes have increased significantly. And new heat pumps use about 30% less energy for cooling. And these savings really add up. Combined, existing standards are saving the average American household about $500 each year on their utility bills. However, even as updates to efficiency standards were driving really big improvements in efficiency for many products, there had been no meaningful update to the standards for gas furnaces in more than 30 years. There's a long history with the gas furnace standards. In 1987, Congress established the first national standards for furnaces at an efficiency level of 78% AFUE. It wasn't until 20 years later, in 2007, that DOE updated that initial standard, and it was only updated to a level of 80 AFUE, which was a level that was already met by nearly 100% of the market. In 2011, DOE finalized new standards that were based on a joint recommendation from manufacturers and efficiency advocates. And those standards set a condensing efficiency level of 90 AFUE in the north, while leaving the efficiency standard at 80 AFUE in the south. The American Public Gas Association sued DOE over that 2011 final rule. And then in 2014, those standards were vacated as part of a settlement agreement. DOE subsequently published a new proposed rule in 2015 that would have raised the standard to 92 AFUE, a condensing level nationally. But the department subsequently missed a 2017 deadline for finalizing those standards. And so as a result, the standard for gas furnaces in effect today is still just 80 AFUE, a non-condensing efficiency level. Some more recent history is that in 2021, in response to a petition from the gas industry, the Trump administration finalized an interpretive rule that essentially required separate product classes for condensing and non-condensing equipment, which blocked DOE from setting any meaningful updated standard for furnaces. However, in late 2021, the Biden administration revoked that interpretive rule and reinstated DOE's longstanding interpretation that non-condensing technology does not constitute a unique consumer utility, thereby, once again, allowing DOE to consider a meaningful update to the furnace standards. For water heaters, DOE has twice updated the initial standards that were established by Congress. Although these were incremental improvements, generally reflecting improved insulation. And the last final rule for water heaters was published back in 2010. So water heaters are also long overdue for an update to the standards. The good news is that in late 2023, DOE finalized new standards for furnaces that will reduce energy use by about 15% relative to the current standard. These new standards require a 95 AFUE level nationally, which DOE estimates will provide average utility bill savings of about $50 per year relative to the current standards. And compliance with those new standards will be required at the end of 2028. As part of their analysis for that rulemaking, DOE looked at whether some consumers may choose to switch to a different type of heating equipment as a result of the new standards. And there's considerable uncertainty as to what that impact might be. But what DOE estimates is that about 1 in 20 households will switch to a heat pump as a result of the new gas furnace standards. In 2023, DOE also proposed new standards for water heaters based on a joint stakeholder recommendation from 2 of the biggest water heater manufacturers, Bradford White and Rheem, along with efficiency, consumer, and environmental advocates. And if finalized, these new standards for water heaters would deliver enormous energy savings. And that's largely because DOE estimates that the proposed standards for electric water heaters would shift about 2/3 of the market to heat pumps. So a huge increase compared to where the market is at today. In that proposed rule, there are 3 main buckets of electric storage water heaters. For the largest units, so those above 55 gallons, the current standards already require heat pump efficiency levels, and the proposed rule would boost those levels slightly. For the heart of the market, those water heaters between 20 and 55 gallons, excluding what DOE is calling small electric storage water heaters, the proposed rule would require heat pump efficiency levels. So this would be the main change compared to where the standards are at today. And then the third category, these small electric storage water heaters, which are defined as having a rated storage volume of less than or equal to 35 gallons and in the very small or low draw pattern. So essentially small water heaters that are designed for low usage. And the proposed rule would maintain electric resistance efficiency levels for these products. And the reason for that is really to accommodate water heaters that are designed for space-constrained installations, such as lowboy water heaters, for which there's not yet a heat pump solution. And so overall, the proposed standards for electric water heaters are designed to shift most of the market to heat pump technology while preserving access to water heaters that are designed for those space-constrained applications. And DOE estimates that for a consumer switching to a heat pump, on average, they'd save more than $200 each year in utility bill savings. So really big savings for consumers that would come from these new standards for electric water heaters. The proposed standards for gas water heaters would reduce energy use by about 9% for gas storage and 13% for gas tankless. For gas storage water heaters, the proposed standards reflect the use of a non-powered damper, which reduces energy losses when the water heater isn't firing. And this is the highest efficiency level that DOE found to be cost-effective in their analysis. DOE did evaluate higher levels reflecting condensing technology, but didn't find those levels to be cost-effective for consumers. For gas tankless water heaters, the proposed standards do reflect condensing technology, and more than half of the gas tankless market is already at condensing levels today. And DOE estimates average annual utility bill savings of about $20 for both gas storage and gas tankless relative to the current standards. The water heater standards potentially could provide a significant boost to electrification efforts. Manufacturers have continued to improve the efficiency of their heat pump water heater products. And there are now products in the market with UEF ratings of up to about 4.0, or in other words, 4 times more efficient than conventional electric resistance water heaters, which is great. But at the same time, heat pump water heaters continue to be a premium product in the market and continue to represent a very small market share. The heat pump efficiency levels in the proposed rule are a UEF of 2.3, which is significantly lower than that of most heat pump water heaters in the market today. And that lower heat pump efficiency level really is designed to give manufacturers room to innovate and to potentially develop significantly lower cost heat pump water heaters, more designed for the mass market, but that are still more than 2 times more efficient than electric resistance water heaters. So once the new standards take effect, a consumer looking to switch from a gas water heater to an electric option will have a much greater range of heat pump options to choose from, including potentially significantly lower cost options than those available today. And the new standards would also help ensure that when a consumer is switching from a gas water heater to an electric option, that they're getting an efficient electric water heater rather than an inefficient electric resistance water heater. So what's ahead? For water heaters, DOE is required to publish a final rule by the end of April, and the standards would then take effect 5 years later, so sometime in 2029. DOE is also set to finalize more than 20 additional standards this year, and combined with those already finalized by the Biden administration, DOE estimates that the standards will reduce utility bills for consumers by nearly $1 trillion and cut CO2 emissions by 2.5 billion metric tons over 30 years of product sales. So still a lot of important work ahead this year to help achieve these big savings goals.
Thanks so much, Joanna. Really appreciate it. And thanks for putting your information there. Maybe a couple quick questions before I turn it over to Steve. John Knox is saying that the Supreme Court is widely expected to greatly restrict the regulatory power of federal agencies. Do you see that being impacting this authority of DOE to propose new standards?
That's a great question. I unfortunately don't know that I can comment on that, not being a lawyer, but it's a great question.
Okay. And then Jim is wondering, is the American Gas Association suing over these 2028 gas furnace standards as they did before?
Yes, the American Gas Association, the American Public Gas Association, and the NPGA filed a lawsuit on the recent final rule, as expected.
Okay.
I wonder if you could, John, could you say a little bit more? I remember you saying that the DOE estimated that 1 in 20 gas furnace heated households would switch to heat pumps as a result of this these standards. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? I mean, what's behind that analysis, and what's the general thought there?
Yeah, so they looked at kind of differences in first cost with the new standard. So basically what the installed cost of a condensing furnace would be relative to a heat pump, as well as differences in operating costs. And essentially, I think their assumption was that if it becomes less expensive to install a heat pump and it's less expensive to operate, a consumer would choose to switch to a heat pump. If it's less expensive to install a heat pump and maybe the operating cost would be a little bit higher than a furnace, but the payback period for the condensing furnace would be more than about 3 years, that a consumer would also choose to switch to a heat pump. So taking into account differences in both first costs and operating costs, and making some assumptions about how consumers might weigh those things, is how they came up with that estimate.
One final question maybe for me before we move on. I was really interested in that 2.3 UEF for heat pump water heaters, which as you mentioned is lower than what we're used to with the current ones that are out there. And that is kind of exciting in terms of the opportunity for this new product segment. Do you have a sense of what the product manufacturers are saying about this? I mean, I'm sure obviously there was a lot of engagement with the manufacturers as part of this process, but what do the heat pump water heater manufacturers say about this this standard? Anything important to relate there?
Just that they've, I think, very much like this idea of having room to innovate and really develop new products that aren't designed for just the small portion of consumers who want to buy them today, but really these kind of more mass market products. So I think they're excited about that opportunity.
Great. Thanks so much, Joanna. Appreciate it. Great. Well, why don't we turn it over to Steve for his presentation?
Hey, thank you. And while I'm pulling up my presentation, I wanted to add a couple of things on top of what Joanna said. One, yes, it's very important that DOE sets these standards, but there's going to be a lot of work for program implementers to get some of the details right. I'm not as worried about furnaces because condensing furnaces is already roughly half of current sales, although in the South, where they're not as used to the products, there may be room to make sure the contractors are properly trained in installation. But for the heat pump water heaters, a lot of contractors are not used to them. So I would strongly encourage efforts in the next few years before they take effect. There's going to be a 5-year ramp-in period to really get the contractors familiar, get the supply houses stocking them. So by the time the mandatory aspect goes into effect, people are really are ready and we don't have hiccups. I'd also note very briefly to one of those questions, I'm also not a lawyer, but I haven't heard too much worry about whether what's going on in the Chevron case, Chevron deference case, will affect appliance standards, because the appliance standards law is pretty specific in terms of what Congress is directing DOE to do. Where you have more problems is where the laws are vague and the agencies really have to do a lot of interpretation. Can I guarantee there won't be any problems? No, I can't, but it's less likely than some of the other places. With that, let me talk a little bit about the impact of electrification and decarbonization on gas distribution costs. Obviously, there's a lot of work about how we incentivize heat pumps, but the other side of it is what's the economics of the competition of sticking with gas? And as Brian referred to, we did a report on this back in June, and I'll be talking about that. I think he'll be making the slides available so you can connect to it. So in terms of future costs to the gas distribution systems, there's 3 main things we looked at in this study. Electrification, because that reduces the amount of gas that is sold, and also the number of customers, if customers actually disconnect from the gas system. There's pipe replacement. Aging pipes in some areas are being replaced. And then as states move to decarbonize, they're looking for lower carbon fuels. And by and large, these are more expensive. Let me go into the particulars here. By background, we took a study from 2018 that analyzed American Gas Association data from more than 100 utilities and said in the US overall, this is how gas distribution costs are divided up. Each utility is a little different, but almost half is the cost of purchase gas. That's a wholesale price. But then many other things. Second biggest is return on utility plant, utilities return on investment, et cetera. All of these go and make up the cost of the gas that we as consumers pay. This particular study, which came from the School of Business at UC Berkeley, also looked at instances where some customers have left the systems and what the impact is. And when a small amount of customers leave the system, the impacts are modest. But as a substantial number of customers leave the system, a lot of those fixed costs need to be reassigned to other customers, and this is their kind of best fit line across dozens of cases. So just keep that in mind. So what we did in our study is we started with this 2018 set of costs. We adjust them to our base year 2023 based on known differences in the 5 years in gas costs and maintenance costs and sales, et cetera. And then based on the Energy Information Administration's 2040 reference case, say, what did we anticipate and under a business as usual scenario would be the cost. So your average gas customer might be paying $700 per year in 2018. Remember, this is national average. It averages together Duluth, Minnesota, and Orlando, Florida, and everywhere in between. That it would, by 2023, that was closing in on $800. That's in 2023 dollars. And under business as usual, by 2040, in 2023 dollars, it'd go to a little more than $800. We then said, of all the different costs, how much of it, if a customer left the system, would no longer be incurred? If a customer leaves the system, you have to buy gas for that customer. So all of that would be lost. On the other hand, you have depreciation on all your prior investments that would have to be reassigned to other customers, some of them in varying ways. And this came from this UC Berkeley study, would be reassigned partially, but not fully. So that's the basis to then say, if our base case home had a little over $800 as the average cost, if 25% of customers leave, such as through electrification, it'd be the average bill would go up to about $1,000. So I'll say a significant increase, but not dramatic. As you get to 50%, it gets even more. We're talking around $1,200. And this is using the same amount of gas. It's just because of what other customers do, how it affects the prices. But if 75% leave, then it really starts getting dramatic, and we're closing in on $2,000 per home. So that's one major set of things that could really affect gas prices. Another is gas pipe replacement. In many old areas, there is significant pipe replacement. PG&E had some explosions in San Bruno. They've done a lot of replacement already. And at least from the data that we got, the normal average in cost will cover that going forward. They've done quite a bit. I heard the same from Northwest Natural in Oregon. In Maryland, they're doing a fair amount of pipe replacement. It's going to cost nearly $5 billion as a projection, and it increases the capital-related cost by 57%. So that's fairly significant. But some of them are much more. Philadelphia Gas Works alone is investing $6 to $8 billion more than the entire state of Maryland. A study by Synax Economics for New York State estimates that they may need to spend $150 billion. And a study by the Rocky Mountain Institute projected that given the amount of pipes that need to be replaced, potentially the capital cost could triple. So quite a range of different estimates varying by locality. What we did is we took our reference case, said, what if the average utility had costs like Maryland? It would go up some, but still below $1,000 per customer. But at the high end, if it went with the tripling that the Rocky Mountain Institute is suggesting, you're well up above $1,600. A lot of utilities are going to be in between, say, the Maryland and the RMI estimate. Third area we looked at is the cost of fuel. If we are going to move away from fossil gas to a lower carbon biogas type product, still some carbon emissions, but lower, varying by the type of fuel and the feedstock. This is a study by ICF or NYSERDA, and you can see the ranges, the weighted average costs, and across all of this, it works out to roughly $26 per million BTU compared to wholesale costs today of under $5 per million BTU. So dramatic increase in that cost of purchased gas. And if we did that, you can see that's the final bar. If we use that cost, what was not quite $1,000 bill would potentially come a $3,500 bill if those costs are correct. This also shows just the normal fluctuations in fossil gas prices per Energy Information Administration. They're low and the high. So we have lots of things that could range from modest impact to substantial impact. We then looked at a couple of combination cases. In the low case, we just said 25% of people leave the systems. That raises the cost to roughly 1,000. In our medium case, we says, what if half electrify? What if you do medium capital cost per Maryland? And what if half of the remaining fuel is biogas? All of a sudden, in that medium case, you could be talking more than $2,000 per customer. And if we do even higher ones, you can be approaching $4,000 per customer. So each utility is different. Given these different scenarios, each state, each utility will have to figure out where they are, but it will, on average, make for substantial increases in gas costs in much of the country. I'd also note, since we're an efficiency organization, how does this affect the economics of efficiency? And in that case, we looked at a home performance with Energy Star package, saves 25%. We use $5,000 financed with a loan to achieve that. As you can see, with low cost gas, this is just for gas customers, the loan payments are probably a little greater than the average energy savings. Remember, this is national average. The energy savings, of course, will be higher in colder climates. So this is your, quote, national average, and it just illustrates. But if you start including increased capital and pipe costs like Maryland, all of a sudden it starts paying a little bit. If 75% of customers leave, it saves a little more. And if you start moving to biogas, it saves a lot. So this will also affect the economics of energy efficiency. Given this, there's a lot of discussion about how to manage a gas system decarbonization. These are, I'm not going to read them, are recommendations from a roundtable convened by RMI and National Grid, whether it's for planning, innovative programs, changes to the utility business model, et cetera. Those are the type of things states are starting to consider typically in proceedings on the future of gas. So what we conclude is residential commercial gas service will become significantly more expensive as we move to decarbonize our systems. That will reduce the number of customers, reduce the amount of fuels. But then if you add in gas pipe replacement and use of biofuels, that will exacerbate those increases. The cost increases will probably be pretty small in the early years. We're only going to have a few customers who electrify and leave the system. It's only when you start having high numbers that it really makes a big difference. The pipe replacements scenarios are typically over a decade or more. And biofuels, some utilities are starting to use 5% biofuels in certain areas, but no one's converting anywhere near the majority of their gas. So this will take time, but over time, these costs will increase. We're saying strategic long-term planning needs to start looking at this. We may need innovative financial structures. We may need to think about community and neighborhood targeting, as in, do you target electrification in areas that do need pipe replacement so that you can avoid some of that? And the solutions are going to vary regionally. The one other thing I would note, I've been talking about the gas side of the equation, but there's also the question of electric rates. And in some areas, the electric rates are fairly high. California, the Northeast, for various reasons. A number of states are starting to look at different rates for electric heating or heat pump customers while still following cost of service principles. Typically, they separate out these what are effectively high energy users from lower energy users because they have different costs of service. They often will put more of the cost of service into a fixed monthly charge, but a lower variable cost for kilowatt hour. Time of use and demand charges are also options. We have a whole paper about this. And just to give one example from this paper, this is a study by the Brattle group that looked at, for a utility that they didn't name, but utility where they had actual data. They looked at what an average cost of service might be pre-electrification, not quite $5,800 in that case. If you electrify under that utilities rates thing, it might go up a little bit. But then if you move to various options, the third bar, the middle bar, was a higher fixed charge, but a lower variable charge. You could actually save money with electrification. And in their case, again, it varies very much depending on specifics, even further reductions for electrification with time of use or demand charges. So your mileage may vary, but that's, I think, an area that there's a lot more interest in. I know Massachusetts, Minnesota, Colorado, California, there are cases pending, and I expect a lot more. And with that, there's my contact information, and happy to go to questions, both for me, but also for Joanna.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Stephen. That was great.
Yeah.
I had a question about the gas pipe, basically these maintenance costs for replacing gas pipes. I know with here in Oregon with the PUC and the Future of Gas docket that was held recently, you know, there's a lot of conversation about depreciation timelines. And in general, you know, historically, I think the depreciation timelines for capital investments for gas utilities and other utilities have been very long, because we've always had this, you know, assumption that, you know, more and more people would be joining the system. And so you have a long time to repay these costs. And now there's questions about whether 50 years even makes sense for when you're talking about gas systems that may not be in operation 50 years from now. So I wonder what sort of considerations for those things was a part of your study or not.
Our study didn't really look at it. We assume depreciation periods remain as they've been on average in the past. But yes, there is a lot of debate about whether do you really want to start depreciating stuff out to 2075 or thereabouts. To the extent you shorten the depreciation periods, if you are going to replace these pipes, that's going to make these price impacts of pipe replacement even higher.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Steve, a quick follow-up on the biogas point you brought. We've done some webinars at Electrify Now on renewable, quote unquote, natural gas. You know, you showed a 5x cost increase. Is there any thought that as biogas would scale, that those prices would come down, or are they destined to remain high?
There's a lot of estimates. No one quite knows for sure. I've seen some estimates that are only 3x. So there are questions about it, but I'm not seeing anybody who's claiming anywhere close to current costs.
Okay, thanks.
And yes, there are ways. I mean, I've seen, for example, we now use one of our largest biofuels is ethanol. It's blended into much gasoline. As vehicles electrify, what happens to that ethanol? And there are now processes to convert that ethanol to other fuels that potentially could be used. And we already have that large scale ethanol capacity. So would that lower it a little bit? Probably.
Along that line, I don't recall that you mentioned hydrogen in your alternative fuels exploration. What are your thoughts about that?
So we looked at residential, small commercial. Yes, there's some people say, oh, we'll just send hydrogen through the pipes. That's going to be problematic. You can mix a little bit in. There's experiments with that. But to go to 100% hydrogen, there are lots of pieces in the gas grid that might need to be replaced. It's going to vary very much from system to system. And there's also a lot of research about what it's going to be like to have 100% hydrogen. Could you do it? Absolutely. The question is how much do you have to change to your gas distribution? The other thing, hydrogen burns a little differently from natural gas. So you are going to have to modify all the burners in homes, whether it's the furnace, the water heater, the stove, etc. That has a cost. So we're tending to think that hydrogen might be used in large factories, might be used in fuel cells for long distance trucking or the like. But if you really want to serve homes and small businesses, that's going to be tough. And we're thinking it's more likely to be a biofuel than switching to hydrogen.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Joanna, circling back to the standards question and maybe zooming in on the water heater standards, Chris is wondering that with these, so you outlined two standards, one proposed standards, one for electric resistance water heaters and one for gas. And so the electric resistance water heaters we saw have a much higher efficiency standard if these rules go into place than the gas ones. And so we could see an increase in cost from those electric resistance water heaters. So Chris is wondering, will that incentivize homeowners to stick with lower cost gas models, and will create a burden on states and utilities to make up the difference in rebates and state legislation, since the gas water heaters don't have a higher standard?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but certainly on the first point, I because of the really high operating costs associated with an electric resistance water heaters, I think it just really doesn't make sense for a consumer to switch from a gas water heater to an electric resistance water heater. And as I noted, the new standards, we think will play a role in really bringing the cost of heat pumps down, which actually could really shift more of the market. People, it will become more attractive in that scenario for people to switch from gas to electric. So I think our assessment is that if anything, this should have a kind of a positive impact on electrification.
Just follow up on that, Joanna. I know we're excited about the 120 volt water heaters that are starting to pop up, and I'm wondering, is there I hadn't really thought about this, but with this sort of relaxed standard, so to speak, or lower UEF requirement than the current kind of market benchmarks that are out there, do we think that makes the 120 volt water heater even more likely to be a kind of viable product going forward, and particularly in those cases where you're talking about fuel switching, where that the circuitry involved in going to a heat pump is sometimes off-putting for people?
Yeah, so that was definitely another part of the kind of consideration and what that heat pump efficiency level should be in making sure that it kind of accommodates all the kind of various configurations of heat pump water heaters that we may see in the future, including those 120 volt models. And since those are kind of new products to the market, having the lower efficiency level also kind of ensures that the standards do accommodate those.
Right. Steve, a question for you. Jim is wondering, in some of the scenarios, if the price of gas reaches $3 a therm, and if that were to surpass the cost of propane, won't some customers just switch to the non-pipeline product at that point? Is that high? Any thoughts?
Interesting. We're working on a study on that very issue. But if you are moving toward a biogas for piped gas, you probably also need to move to a biogas for the deliver fuels. And yes, there are, quote, renewable propanes. We're finding, and this is preliminary, because the analysis is still going on, that as a backup fuel, not as a primary fuel, potentially, yes, the renewable propane could be useful, because that allows you to disconnect from the gas system, particularly if the gas rates are going up because customers are leaving that. there may be advantages to leave the gas system, go with renewable propane as a backup. I'm talking about in places like Minnesota. I live in Maryland. We don't need a backup. We can just go all electric. But for cold climates, some backup may be useful. And yes, we should think about a renewable propane. Or likewise, there's renewable fuel oils that some people would use.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get your brain around this idea where propane might be more economically attractive than pumped gas, but I could see it as as you're describing in here.
But in limited quantities, you know, for
Mhm.
again, preliminary results that may change. The average home, even in Minnesota, could probably make do with 100-gallon propane tank, fill it just once a year and use it for those really cold spells.
Mhm.
Well, Steve, follow-up question. Well, on that, you were talking a little bit at the end on the planning needed around maybe taking entire neighborhoods off the gas line. Have you seen the so-called gas pruning? Have you seen any examples of this happening yet, where they're, effectively removing entire communities
It
from the gas line?
It's just starting in California. I know PG&E is working with developer of some, I think it's 800 unit development that has gas service now and needed some upgrades, and they're going to electrify it. There's a couple of other projects where they've identified communities where they want to try to electrify like 80 homes and decommission the gas line, but they're still doing community outreach, and then there's some questions about funding. So I'm just saying there are initial pilots. The other thing I would note, in Massachusetts and New York, there are some pilots where they are installing down the middle of the street where there now is a gas line, a ground loop type system, and having ground source heat pumps. That's another way. Again, it's pilots, but we're just starting to see a few of these pilots.
Thanks, that's great. Brian, you have a question? I've got
Well,
one.
I see there's this question here that about boilers, and I know that in multifamily situations, for example, sometimes the justification for natural gas is for some central boiler that would be used to provide hot water to multiple units, and the technology for heat pumps for those situations is still relatively early in its development, and compared to the commercial ones, which are readily available for residential use. So I'm just curious, do these standards remind me again how these standards would affect those sorts of situations, like multifamily, for example, where currently they would be using a central gas boiler?
I'm assuming Joanna will take that one.
Yes, thank you.
Right. So the standards that we've been talking about today cover residential furnaces and residential water heaters. There are separate standards, for example, for commercial boilers. So what we're like the water heater standards, would affect multifamily to the extent that they're water heater, kind of individual water heaters used in multifamily units, but not the central systems.
Thank you.
Right. And I would add that we're also at ACEEE starting to look at how do you electrify those types of buildings. You could use, hang lots of ductless heat pumps everywhere. You could do a VRF system, but those are so far in limited applications proven pretty complicated. We're also looking at the idea of installing a heat pump to serve that central system. It can heat the hot water to about 140 degrees, not quite hot enough to fully serve during cold climates, and maybe having a much smaller gas boiler, conceivably it could be propane at some point, for the really cold days to heat that water from 140 to 180 and get that hot water that you need to supply the heat on the very coldest days. That concepts now, but yes, we very much have to look at how do you electrify those homes and not just those nice little suburban single family homes.
I'll put in a plug for the Advanced Water Heating Initiative's Commercial Heat Pump Water Heater Working Group. They're tackling these issues head on. Yeah, I think the first installations and pilots are just for that domestic hot water and less for the space heating. And sometimes you separate it out where Steve says you put the ductless heat pumps for the space heating, then you provide the water with a commercial heat pump water heater. But yeah, lots of interesting advancements going there.
Stephen, I have a question for you. I would imagine that many people on the call would be interested in that information you were talking about in terms of electric rates, alternative kind of rate structures for fixed versus variable costs. Can you just tell people how they can get more information on that from?
When you distribute the slides, I included a link to a report we came out looking at about 4 or 5 different studies and proposals as of September of this year. So look at that. But we continue to do a lot of work. So keep up on our website. I know there's just been a filing by Excel on new heat pump rates, both National Grid and Unitel in Massachusetts have recently filed potential rates. There's this I'll say controversial and long-running proceeding in California, whether to move to income-based fixed charges. So how that evolves will affect this. Central Maine Power has a pilot that's gone pretty well. So this is definitely an area of lots of activity. And I think it's going to be very important on how do we improve heat pump economics while following cost of service principles. We're not asking to subsidize these homes, but we are, for at least the way rates are structured in some places, these customers are subsidizing other customers. And how do we have that cost of service based rates that is fair for everybody, and in many cases may actually help heat pump economics.
Right.
Just to make sure I understand that correctly, is it basically have to do with this idea that, when you electrify homes, you're using, I was thinking about your pie chart on the gas side of the sort of the commodity cost, the actual thing that gives you energy, which is the gas, is less than half of the total cost that you're paying as a customer. So is the idea behind these alternative rate structures that as homes use more electricity, but the infrastructure costs are the same, the distribution costs are the same, but the energy costs are higher. You should change that ratio of costs. Am I understanding that roughly correctly? Is that
is
how
related
would justify these different systems?
To oversimplify, because each rate is different, but by and large, the fixed price most customers pay each month only pays a portion of the fixed costs. The other portion of the fixed cost, varying from rate to rate and utility to utility, is covered in the variable charges. And if you're a high user, you're paying, quote, more than your share of those costs. So the more for the high users, we move some of those costs, fixed costs to fixed costs, and lower the variable costs, that may make sense. You don't want to do it for everybody, or else, you start having, somebody who just has a bunch of light bulbs and they're paying $50 a month fixed charge. Right. And often I'll add one more comment. You often should look at this in combination with some type of low income rates. We want to make sure that as we're doing this, we're not hurting those least able to afford electricity, which is now an essential.
Yeah, as we've seen with power outages. Okay, maybe another quick question to close us off here, Joanna, for you. Nancy's wondering, are there ways for us to support these new appliance standards for furnaces and water heaters? And then can you just remind us all again on the timeline for the final decisions on both the water heaters and furnaces?
Yeah, so furnace standard is now finalized, has been published in the Federal Register, scheduled to take effect in 2028. As I mentioned, there's this lawsuit that was brought by the gas industry, but there's nothing left to do as far as the rulemaking is considered. And the water heater standard we should see in April. So the comment period has closed on the proposed rule. we'd, certainly welcome folks promoting those, new standards and helping talk about the benefits that they'll deliver, and any support on the additional standards that are on tap for finalization later this year. So thanks for that question.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Joanna, for those fantastic presentations and sharing your insights. Brian, you want to leave everybody with our final thoughts?
I'll just echo, thanks, Stephen and Joanna. That was fantastic. And thanks for all your great work. We really appreciate what you do every day to help all of us energy consumers save money and move the world to a more sustainable future. And for our audience, thank you again for tuning in. And if good luck with all your electrification projects. And if you have any questions on anything, either today or on other topics, feel free to reach out to Joe and I, and we'll try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.